The stagecoach lurched violently as Penelope Jameson pressed herself against the worn leather seat, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. She had been running for 3 weeks now, ever since that terrible night in San Francisco, when she had witnessed something no respectable woman should ever see, something that had painted a target on her back and forced her to abandon everything she had ever known. The California wilderness stretched endlessly outside the dusty window, and somewhere behind her, dangerous men were searching, always searching. She clutched the small leather bag in her lap, the one containing every remaining possession she owned in this world. Her fingers trembled as she thought about what lay ahead. Yosemite, California. She had chosen the town at random from a crumpled newspaper advertisement seeking domestic help at various ranches. It was remote enough, isolated enough, that perhaps she could disappear into the mountains and valleys surrounding it. Perhaps she could finally stop looking over her shoulder. The year was 1882, and the West was still wild enough that a woman could reinvent herself if she was clever and desperate enough. Penelope was both. At 23, she had already lived through more heartache and terror than most women experienced in a lifetime. Her auburn hair was tucked beneath a plain bonnet, and her green eyes, once bright with dreams of a different future, now carried shadows that aged her beyond her years. When the stagecoach finally rattled into Yosemite 2 days later, Penelope stepped down onto the dusty main street with legs that barely supported her weight. The town was smaller than she had imagined, nestled in a valley with towering granite cliffs rising majestically in the distance. Pine trees dotted the landscape, and the air smelled crisp and clean, so different from the salt and smoke of San Francisco. She made her way to the general store, where a kind-faced woman directed her to the Silver Creek Ranch, owned by Xavier Ingram. He was looking for help with cooking and household duties, the woman explained, ever since his mother had passed the previous winter. The ranch was about 5 miles outside of town, accessible by a rough wagon road that wound through meadows and forest. Penelope hired a wagon for the journey, spending precious coins she could barely afford to lose. As the driver steered the horses along the rutted path, she studied the landscape with growing appreciation. This place felt removed from the world, protected by the mountains and distance. Maybe here she could finally breathe. The Silver Creek Ranch appeared as they crested a hill, sprawling across a wide valley with a creek cutting through the property. The main house was built of timber and stone, solid and well-maintained. Corrals held horses and cattle, and several outbuildings dotted the landscape. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Penelope felt an unexpected flutter of hope in her chest. The wagon driver helped her down and departed quickly, leaving her standing alone in the yard with her single bag. She smoothed her travel-worn dress and approached the house, her boots crunching on the gravel. Before she could knock, the door swung open, and she found herself face to face with a man who took her breath away. Xavier Ingram stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled the doorframe. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and intense. He wore work clothes, a simple shirt rolled up to reveal strong forearms, and there was dirt under his fingernails that spoke of honest labor. He looked to be in his late 20s, and there was something in his weathered face that suggested he understood hardship. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep, cautious. He was clearly not expecting visitors. Penelope forced herself to speak past the sudden dryness in her throat. "I am here about the position, for household help. Mrs. Anderson at the general store said you were looking for someone." Xavier's eyes traveled over her, taking in her tired appearance and the wariness in her expression. Something shifted in his face, a softening that made him seem almost gentle despite his imposing size. "You came all the way out here without sending word first. I needed work immediately." It was not quite a lie. "I can cook, clean, mend, and manage a household. I am a hard worker, and I do not require much in terms of wages." He studied her for a long moment, and Penelope had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through her carefully constructed composure. "You running from something?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that she nearly stumbled backward. Her face must have betrayed her shock because Xavier held up a hand. "I am not judging. These mountains are full of people trying to start over. I just need to know if trouble is going to follow you to my door." Penelope lifted her chin, meeting his gaze squarely. "I witnessed something I should not have seen in San Francisco. Men who would rather no one knew about their business. I am not a criminal, and I have done nothing wrong, but I needed to leave the city quickly." The honesty seemed to surprise him. Xavier stepped back from the doorway, gesturing for her to enter. "Come inside. You look like you have not had a decent meal in days." The interior of the house was rustic but comfortable, with furniture that showed the work of skilled hands. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows looked out over the valley. Everything was relatively clean but carried the unmistakable air of a house without a woman's touch for too long. Xavier led her to the kitchen, where he proceeded to dish out stew from a pot hanging over the fire. "Sit," he commanded, placing the bowl in front of her along with fresh bread. "Eat first. We can talk business after." Penelope wanted to protest, to maintain some dignity, but the smell of the food made her stomach clench with hunger. She had been rationing her money so carefully that meals had become sparse. She picked up the spoon with as much grace as she could muster and began to eat. Xavier sat across from her, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. He did not speak, just watched her with those penetrating gray eyes. The silence should have been uncomfortable, but somehow it was not. There was something steady about his presence, something that made her feel safer than she had felt in weeks. When she finally set down her spoon, having eaten every drop, Xavier leaned back in his chair. "I will be honest with you. I need help around here. The ranch keeps me busy from dawn until well past dark, and the house has been falling into disorder since my mother passed. I can offer you room and board, a small wage and safety. In return, I need someone who can keep the household running, prepare meals, and handle the domestic work." "I can do all of that," Penelope said quietly. "And I promise I will not bring trouble to your door. I just need a place where I can disappear for a while." Xavier nodded slowly. "The bedroom upstairs on the right is yours. It was my mother's room. I will respect your privacy, and I expect you to respect mine. We will take meals together, as I do not believe in unnecessary formality, but beyond that, you are free to spend your time as you wish when your work is done." Relief flooded through Penelope so powerfully that tears pricked at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you. You will not regret this." "I hope not." He stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Get settled today. You can start your duties tomorrow. There is a lock on your bedroom door if that makes you feel more comfortable." The consideration in his words touched something deep inside her, something she thought had been frozen solid by fear and running. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and gathered her bag before heading upstairs. The room was spacious and filled with afternoon light. A large bed with a quilt dominated the space, and there was a dresser, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. Penelope set down her bag and walked to the window, looking out over the ranch and the mountains beyond. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could take a full breath. That night, she lay in the comfortable bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. horses whinnying in the distance, the wind rustling through the pines, the creak of the house settling. She heard Xavier moving around downstairs for a while before his footsteps climbed the stairs and moved to what must be his bedroom on the opposite end of the hall. The house fell silent, and Penelope closed her eyes, willing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found sanctuary. The next morning, she woke before dawn and dressed quickly in her plainest work dress. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Xavier already outside, his voice carrying through the window as he spoke to the horses. Penelope set to work, stoking the fire and beginning breakfast. She found supplies in the pantry and cellar, enough to make a proper meal of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy. Xavier came in just as she was setting the table, and he stopped short at the sight of the spread. "I usually just have coffee and whatever bread is left from the previous day," he said, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "That is not enough to sustain a man doing hard labor," Penelope replied, pouring him coffee. "Sit and eat while it is hot." He did as she asked, and she watched as he took the first bite. His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, there was something vulnerable in his expression. "I forgot what it was like to have real cooking. My mother was good at this, making a house feel like a home." They ate in companionable silence, and Penelope found herself relaxing slightly in his presence. Xavier was not a man who filled silence with empty words, and she appreciated that. When he finished, he carried his plate to the basin. "I will be out working the herd today. If you need anything from town, let me know, and I will ride in later this week." The days began to fall into a rhythm. Penelope rose early, prepared breakfast, and spent her days cleaning, mending, and maintaining the household. She discovered that Xavier's mother had kept a garden, now overgrown, and she began the work of reclaiming it. In the evenings, she prepared dinner, and they would eat together, their conversations slowly growing longer and more substantial. Xavier was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. He told her about the ranch, about how his father had started it 30 years ago and how he had worked alongside his parents until they passed. His father had died 5 years earlier in a riding accident, and his mother had followed just months ago from a fever that took her quickly. He spoke of the loneliness of the place, how he had thrown himself into work to avoid the emptiness of the house. Penelope shared less, still cautious, but Xavier never pushed. He seemed content to let her reveal herself in her own time. She told him about growing up in a small town in Missouri, about coming to San Francisco to work as a seamstress, about the city's excitement and dangers. She did not tell him about that night, about the men she had seen conducting business that was clearly criminal, about how one of them had spotted her in the window and how she had run, knowing that her life depended on disappearing. 3 weeks passed, and Penelope began to feel the constant tension in her shoulders ease. The ranch was isolated enough that visitors were rare, and when the occasional cowhand or neighbor stopped by, Xavier was always careful to introduce her simply as his housekeeper, nothing more. She appreciated his discretion. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner watching the sun paint the granite cliffs gold and pink, Xavier turned to her. "You settling in all right?" "Yes," Penelope said softly. "Better than I expected. This place feels peaceful." "It is." He was quiet for a moment, his hands resting on his knees. "I have been thinking about something. You have been here almost a month now, and you still flinch every time you hear a horse approaching. You still look toward the road like you are expecting someone to come riding up with bad intentions." Penelope's stomach tightened. "I am sorry if my nervousness troubles you." "It does not trouble me," Xavier said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It worries me. Whatever you saw, whoever you are running from, it must have been serious for you to still be this frightened." She did not respond, could not find the words. Xavier turned to look at her, his gray eyes reflecting the fading light. "I want you to know something. This ranch, this land, it is a place where people can start over. I meant what I said when I hired you. You are safe here. And if anyone comes looking for you, they will have to go through me first." The fierce protectiveness in his words made Penelope's throat tighten with emotion. She had been alone for so long, fighting to survive, that the idea of someone standing between her and danger seemed almost impossible to believe. "Why would you do that? You barely know me." "I know enough." Xavier's gaze did not waver. "I know you are a good person who has been dealt a bad hand. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever hired. I know you brought life back into this house when I thought it would just be an empty shell for the rest of my days. That is enough for me." Penelope felt tears slip down her cheeks before she could stop them. She turned away, embarrassed by the display of emotion, but Xavier reached out and gently turned her face back toward him with one calloused finger under her chin. "Do not hide from me. You have been strong for so long. You are allowed to let down your guard here." Something broke open inside her chest, some wall she had built to protect herself. The story came pouring out, all of it. She told him about walking home late from the dress shop where she worked, about taking a shortcut through an alley, about looking up at a building and seeing through a lit window men counting stacks of money while others stood guard with guns. She told him about being spotted, about running through the dark streets while men chased her, about how she had hidden in a church until morning and then immediately bought passage on the first stagecoach heading anywhere far away. "They were criminals, clearly," she said, her voice shaking. "Important ones from the way they were dressed, and they saw my face. I heard one of them shout that they could not let any witnesses survive. So I ran, and I have been running ever since." Xavier listened to every word, his expression growing darker. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Your future starts right here on this ranch with me." Penelope blinked at him, startled by the intensity in his voice. "What? You heard me?" Xavier's hand was still touching her face, and now his thumb brushed away her tears. "You do not have to keep running. You do not have to keep looking over your shoulder. You stay here on this ranch and you build a future with me. Xavier, I cannot ask you to put yourself in danger for me. You are not asking, I am offering." His other hand came up to cup her face, and Penelope found herself frozen, caught in his steady gaze. "I have been alone in this house for too long, Penelope. Alone with my grief and my work and nothing else to fill the hours. Then you came and everything changed. The house feels alive again. I look forward to coming inside at the end of the day. I find myself hurrying through my work so I can sit across from you at dinner and listen to you talk about the garden or the book you found in my mother's room. You have given me something I did not know I was missing." "Xavier," she whispered, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "I am not a man who speaks pretty words easily," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "But I need you to understand, I care about what happens to you, I care about you. And I am asking you to stay, not just as my housekeeper, but as someone building a life here with me, if you will have me." Penelope's hands came up to cover his, pressing his palms against her cheeks. "I barely know you, you barely know me. This is madness. Maybe." A small smile tugged at his lips. "But the West has always been a place for the mad and the desperate. We are both a little of each, seems fitting." She laughed, a sound that was half sob. "I am terrified. Of me?" "No," the answer came instantly with absolute certainty. "Never of you. Of hoping, of believing this could be real. It is real." Xavier leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. As real as this land, as real as the work we do, as real as the sun rising over those mountains every morning. I am not going anywhere, and I am not going to let anyone hurt you. You are under my protection now, and that means something out here." Penelope closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, leather and pine and something uniquely Xavier. She had been running for so long, her body and mind exhausted from fear and uncertainty. The idea of stopping, of putting down roots, of trusting someone, it should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "All right," she whispered. "All right, I will stay." Xavier pulled back just enough to look at her, his gray eyes searching her face. "You mean that?" "I do." She managed a tremulous smile. "I do not know what the future holds, but I want to find out. Here. With you." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and reverent, Xavier's lips brushing against hers with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Penelope responded, her hands sliding from his to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming something more desperate, more real, a seal on promises made and futures hoped for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers again. "I will keep you safe, I swear it." "I believe you," Penelope said, and she realized with shock that she meant it. Against all odds, against all logic, she trusted this man she had known for less than a month. The next weeks were a revelation. Penelope had never experienced courtship, had never had time for romance in her life of work and survival. But Xavier courted her with a steady persistence that was utterly disarming. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow, presented awkwardly over breakfast. He taught her to ride, his hand steadying her in the saddle while his voice murmured encouragement. He sat with her in the evenings, reading aloud from books while she mended clothes, their companionship deepening with every passing day. They were careful with each other, both aware of the fragility of what was growing between them. Xavier never pushed for more than Penelope was ready to give, and she found herself falling for him more deeply with each day that passed. He was everything she had never known she needed: steady, honest, protective, and surprisingly tender beneath his rough exterior. One afternoon, about 2 months after Penelope had arrived at the ranch, Xavier came in early from his work with a troubled expression. Penelope looked up from the bread dough she was kneading, her stomach instantly tightening with concern. "What is wrong?" "There are men in town asking questions," Xavier said without preamble. "I heard about it from Tom Baker when I rode in for supplies this morning. 2 men, well-dressed, from San Francisco. They are asking about a woman who might have arrived in the area a couple of months back, auburn hair, green eyes, traveling alone." The blood drained from Penelope's face and her hands stilled in the dough. "They found me. They have not found you yet." Xavier's voice was firm. He crossed to her, taking her flour-dusted hands in his. "But they are looking. Tom said they visited the general store, the saloon, the boarding house. They have not come out here yet, but it is only a matter of time." Panic clawed at Penelope's throat. "I have to leave. I have to run again." "I cannot bring this to your door, Xavier. I will not. You are not leaving." His grip on her hands tightened. "Listen to me. We have options." "What options?" "They will come here. They will question you. And when they realize you have been hiding me, they will hurt you too." "Not if you are not hiding." Xavier's eyes blazed with intensity. "Not if you are my wife." Penelope stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me?" The words came out fierce, determined. "Today, right now, we ride to town, find the preacher, and get married." "Then you are Penelope Ingram, my wife, not some woman on the run. You are part of this community, part of this ranch. You have a legitimate reason to be here and protection under my name." "Xavier, that is insane. You cannot marry me just to keep me safe." "I am not marrying you just to keep you safe." He pulled her closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am marrying you because I love you. I have loved you since the day you walked into my house looking like a cornered animal and still managed to hold your head high with dignity. I have loved you through every breakfast, every evening on the porch, every moment of watching you bring life back to this place. The men in town just moved up my timeline, that is all." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks, but these were different from the tears of fear and exhaustion she had cried before. These were tears of hope, of disbelief, of overwhelming emotion. "You love me, with everything I am," Xavier said simply. "And I am asking you to marry me, to take my name and my protection and build a life here with me. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because this is what I want. You are what I want. Say yes, Penelope, please." She looked into his eyes, those steady gray eyes that had been her anchor through all the storms of the past months, and she knew her answer. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Xavier's face transformed with a smile so brilliant it took her breath away. He swept her up in his arms, lifting her right off her feet, and spun her around the kitchen while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, thoroughly, a kiss that promised everything and demanded nothing but her heart in return. They rode to town within the hour, Penelope seated in front of Xavier on his horse, his arms solid around her. Her heart hammered with a mixture of fear and excitement, but Xavier's presence kept her grounded. When they arrived in Yosemite, he tied the horse outside the small church and led her inside, his hand warm and strong around hers. The preacher, Reverend Thomas, was an elderly man with kind eyes who had known Xavier since he was a boy. He looked surprised at their request, but was willing to perform the ceremony. "Do you have witnesses?" he asked. "I will find them," Xavier said. He stepped outside and returned minutes later with Tom Baker and his wife, Martha, who looked delighted at the prospect of a wedding. Martha immediately fussed over Penelope, adjusting her hair and pinching her cheeks to bring color to them. "I knew it," Martha whispered with a smile. "I saw you two at the general store last week, and I told Tom there was something special there." The ceremony was brief and simple, but Penelope felt every word of the vows sink deep into her soul. When Xavier slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, one that had belonged to his mother, her tears flowed freely. And when Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that Martha sighed happily. They signed the marriage certificate, making everything legal and binding, and Xavier tucked the document carefully into his coat. "Thank you, Reverend." "Tom, Martha, we appreciate you standing with us." "Our pleasure," Tom said, shaking Xavier's hand. "You take care of your bride now." As they stepped out of the church into the afternoon sunlight, Penelope felt different somehow, protected, claimed, loved. She was no longer a woman on the run. She was Penelope Ingram, wife of Xavier Ingram, mistress of Silver Creek Ranch. Xavier lifted her back onto the horse, mounting behind her. But instead of heading immediately out of town, he steered toward the general store. "We should let Mrs. Anderson know about the marriage. Word will spread, and it is better if everyone knows you are my wife before those men from San Francisco make it out to the ranch." They entered the general store, and Mrs. Anderson looked up with a smile that widened when she saw them together. "Xavier and Mrs. Jameson, what can I do for you?" "It is Mrs. Ingram now," Xavier said, his voice carrying pride. "We were just married." Mrs. Anderson's hands flew to her chest. "Oh my goodness, congratulations. This is wonderful news." Her eyes darted between them, full of questions, but she was too polite to pry. "Will you be having a celebration?" "Just a quiet dinner at home," Xavier replied smoothly. "But we wanted you to know, as you were the one who directed Penelope to the ranch in the first place. We have you to thank for our happiness." Mrs. Anderson beamed. As Xavier made a few purchases, including a better cut of beef for their wedding dinner, Penelope noticed two men at the back of the store. They were dressed in fine city clothes, out of place in the rustic surroundings, and they were watching the exchange with interest. Her blood ran cold. Xavier must have seen her reaction because his hand found the small of her back, steadying her. He completed the transaction with Mrs. Anderson, then turned to leave, but one of the men stepped forward. "Pardon me," the man said. He was tall and thin, with cold eyes and a calculating expression. "I could not help but overhear. You just got married today." Xavier's expression was polite but guarded. "That is correct. Congratulations." The man's smile did not reach his eyes. "I am looking for someone, a woman who came to this area about 2 months ago. Auburn hair, green eyes, traveling alone. You would not happen to have seen anyone matching that description." Penelope felt her heart stop, but Xavier's hand remained steady on her back. "As you can see, my wife matches that description, but she has been at my ranch for 2 months helping me manage the household. We just made our arrangement permanent today." The man's eyes narrowed as he studied Penelope. "Your name, madam?" "Penelope Ingram," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Formerly Jameson. And where were you before coming to Yosemite, Missouri?" Penelope lied smoothly. "I came west looking for work and found a position at Mr. Ingram's ranch." The man did not look entirely convinced, but Xavier stepped slightly in front of Penelope, his body language protective. "Is there some reason you are questioning my wife? She has done nothing wrong." "Just looking for someone," the man said, his tone still suspicious. "Someone who witnessed something they should not have in San Francisco." "Well, as my wife just told you, she came from Missouri, not San Francisco." Xavier's voice took on an edge. "Now, if you will excuse us, we have a wedding dinner to get to." He guided Penelope toward the door, but the man called after them. "I will need to verify your story." Xavier turned back, his expression hard. "You are welcome to speak with Reverend Thomas at the church. He just performed our ceremony and can attest to everything I have told you. You can also speak with Tom Baker and his wife, who served as witnesses. Beyond that, I suggest you move along. My wife and I have a life to live, and it does not include being harassed by strangers." He did not wait for a response, just ushered Penelope out of the store and lifted her onto the horse. They rode out of town at a measured pace, not hurrying, not giving any indication that they had anything to hide. But once they were out of sight of the buildings, Xavier urged the horse faster. "That was terrifying," Penelope breathed against his chest. "You did well," Xavier said into her hair. "You did not panic. You kept your story straight. And now you have a legal marriage certificate, witnesses, and a community that knows you as my wife. That gives you protection, Penelope. Real protection." When they arrived back at the ranch, Xavier helped her down and held her for a long moment, just breathing her in. "You are safe now. You are my wife, and that means something out here. Those men can ask all the questions they want, but they will not find the woman they are looking for. That woman does not exist anymore. You are Penelope Ingram now, and this is your home." Penelope clung to him, letting his certainty and strength seep into her bones. "I love you," she whispered. "I should have said it in the church, but I was too overwhelmed. I love you, Xavier, so much." His arms tightened around her. "I know, I have known for a while. You show me every day in 100 small ways." That evening, they prepared dinner together, moving around the kitchen with an easy familiarity that felt both new and ancient. Xavier opened a bottle of wine he had been saving, and they ate their wedding dinner by candlelight, talking and laughing and stealing kisses between courses. When the meal was finished and the dishes were cleared, an awkwardness fell between them. They were married now, legally and in the eyes of God, but they had not discussed the physical realities of that union. Penelope felt her cheeks heat as Xavier watched her with those steady gray eyes. "I do not expect anything tonight," he said quietly, "or any night until you are ready. This marriage is real, and it will be a true marriage in every way when the time is right, but I will not push you." Penelope stood, her heart pounding, and crossed to where he sat. She took his hands and pulled him to his feet. "I am ready," she said softly. "I want this to be real. I want to be your wife in every way." Xavier searched her face, making sure she meant it. Whatever he saw there satisfied him because he lifted her into his arms and carried her up the stairs to his bedroom, now their bedroom. He set her down gently and lit a lamp, the soft glow illuminating the space. What followed was tender and sweet, Xavier taking his time, showing her with his hands and lips and whispered words how precious she was to him. Penelope had been terrified of intimacy, scared of being vulnerable, but with Xavier, there was no fear. There was only love and trust and the joining of two souls who had found each other against all odds. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Penelope's head on Xavier's chest while his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me a future when I thought I had none. For loving me when I did not think I deserved to be loved. For making me your wife." Xavier pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I am the one who should be thanking you. You brought me back to life, Penelope. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You made me feel again, hope again, love again. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, safe in their home on Silver Creek Ranch. The next morning, Xavier was up before dawn as usual, but this time Penelope woke with him. They dressed together, stealing kisses and shy smiles, both still adjusting to this new reality. Over breakfast, Xavier grew more serious. "I need to go into town today and speak with the sheriff. I want him to know about those men who were asking questions. If they are who I think they are, if they are criminals from San Francisco, the sheriff should be aware of their presence." Penelope nodded, anxiety creeping back into her chest. "You think they believed our story?" "I think they were suspicious, but we have documentation and witnesses. More importantly, you have a legitimate reason to be here now. You are not hiding." He reached across the table to take her hand. "But I want to make sure the sheriff knows to keep an eye out, just in case those men decide to cause trouble." Xavier rode into town after breakfast, leaving Penelope at the ranch with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the rifle nearby. She tried to focus on her chores, but her mind kept circling back to those cold eyes studying her in the general store. Xavier returned in the late afternoon with news. "I spoke with Sheriff Morrison. He knows those men have been asking questions all over town, and he does not like it. He is going to have a conversation with them, make it clear that harassing upstanding citizens is not welcome in Yosemite. He also said that, without any proof of wrongdoing, and with you being a married woman with a legal residence here, they have no grounds to bother you." Relief flooded through Penelope. "So we are safe. We are as safe as we can be," Xavier said carefully. "But I want to be prepared. I am going to teach you how to shoot properly, and I am going to make sure everyone in the valley knows you are my wife. The more integrated you are into this community, the harder it will be for anyone to claim you do not belong here." Over the following weeks, Xavier made good on his promises. He taught Penelope to shoot, his patience unwavering as she learned to handle the rifle and his pistol. He took her to the neighboring ranches, introducing her as his wife to the other families in the valley. Everyone was welcoming, delighted that Xavier had finally found happiness after his mother's death. Martha Baker became a particular friend, riding over to visit and bringing baked goods and gossip from town. "Those men from San Francisco left," she told Penelope one afternoon over tea. "Sheriff Morrison had a talk with them, and they rode out the next day. Mrs. Anderson said they looked angry about it, but they went." Penelope felt some of the constant tension ease from her shoulders. Maybe they really were safe. Maybe her past would stay buried, and she could truly begin this new life with Xavier. As autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Penelope fell more deeply in love with both the land and her husband. Xavier was everything she had never dared to dream of: strong yet gentle, protective yet respectful of her independence, passionate yet patient. They worked side by side on the ranch, their partnership extending beyond the bedroom and the dinner table to every aspect of their lives. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets against the chill, Xavier turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Have you thought about the future? About what you want our life to look like?" Penelope considered the question. "I want to keep building this life with you. I want to expand the garden next spring, maybe get some chickens. I want to learn more about ranching so I can help you better with the work. And someday, when we are ready, I would like to have children." Xavier's eyes lit up at that last part. "You want children?" "I do," Penelope smiled. "I never thought I would have the chance to be a mother, but now, with you in this place, I can imagine it. Can you?" "I can imagine everything with you," Xavier said, pulling her closer. "I want sons to help with the ranch and daughters to spoil. I want this house filled with the sound of children laughing and running through the halls. I want to build a legacy here, something we can pass down to the next generation." They sealed the promise with a kiss, and Penelope felt her heart swell with happiness so profound it almost frightened her. She had never believed she could have this, never dared to hope for such simple, complete joy. Winter came to the valley, blanketing the ranch in snow and testing Penelope in new ways. She learned to manage the household through the cold months, preserving food, keeping the fires burning, and ensuring that both humans and animals remained warm and fed. Xavier taught her the rhythms of winter ranching, and she discovered she had a talent for caring for sick or injured animals. One particularly harsh night in January, a late-season storm struck with unexpected ferocity. Xavier was out checking on the cattle when the blizzard hit, and Penelope watched the wall of white descend with growing terror. Hours passed with no sign of her husband, and she paced the house, alternating between praying and cursing. When Xavier finally stumbled through the door, half frozen and exhausted, Penelope flew to him. "Thank God! I thought I had lost you." "It will take more than a snowstorm to keep me from you," Xavier said through chattering teeth. Penelope helped him out of his frozen clothes and wrapped him in blankets, settling him by the fire with hot coffee laced with whiskey. She rubbed warmth back into his hands and feet, her touch gentle but efficient. "Do not ever scare me like that again," she whispered fiercely. Xavier pulled her into his lap, blankets and all. "I am sorry. The storm came up faster than I expected. But I got the cattle into the lower pasture where they have some shelter. They should be all right until morning." Penelope buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of him beneath the cold and wet. "I cannot lose you. You are everything to me." "You will not lose me," Xavier promised. "I have too much to live for now. I have you, and I have plans for our future. I am not going anywhere." Spring arrived eventually, as it always did, transforming the valley into a riot of wildflowers and new growth. Penelope threw herself into expanding the garden, working the soil and planting vegetables and herbs. She also discovered she was pregnant, the news filling both her and Xavier with overwhelming joy. "We are going to have a baby," Xavier kept repeating, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." Penelope laughed at his wonder. Yes, we are, in late October according to my calculations. Xavier became even more protective, insisting she rest more and work less, though Penelope insisted she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. Women have been having babies for thousands of years, she reminded him. I am not made of glass. You are carrying the most precious thing in the world, Xavier countered. Our child. Let me fuss over you, it makes me feel useful. As her pregnancy progressed, Penelope blossomed. She had never felt more alive, more connected to her body and the earth and the cycles of life. Xavier was attentive and loving, his hands constantly finding her growing belly, his voice soft as he spoke to their unborn child. In late July, Martha Baker rode over with unexpected news that sent a chill down Penelope's spine. Those men from San Francisco are back, she said quietly, glancing at Penelope's pregnant form. They arrived yesterday and have been asking the same questions again. Xavier's expression hardened. They are persistent. Penelope, stay here. I am going into town to have a conversation with these men once and for all. No, Penelope grabbed his arm. Xavier, they are dangerous. You said so yourself. Which is why I need to handle this now before our baby comes. His hand rested on her belly. I will not have you living in fear. I will not have our child growing up with threats hanging over us. This ends today. Before Penelope could argue further, Xavier kissed her firmly and headed out, his rifle in hand. Martha stayed with Penelope, both women tense and worried as they waited for his return. It was evening before Xavier rode back, and Penelope ran out to meet him, her heart in her throat. He dismounted and pulled her close, his expression grim but satisfied. It is handled. What happened? I found them at the saloon. I told them in no uncertain terms that my wife had nothing to do with whatever they were looking for. I showed them our marriage certificate, introduced them to half the town who can vouch for you being here for almost a year now. And I made it very clear that any further harassment would be met with legal action, and whatever other measures I deemed necessary to protect my family. And they believed you. They had no choice. Sheriff Morrison backed me up. So did Tom Baker and a few of the other ranchers. We outnumbered them, and they could see they were not going to get anywhere. Xavier's arms tightened around her. They left town an hour ago. The sheriff made sure they understood they were not welcome back. Penelope sagged against him, relief making her weak. Is it really over? It is really over. Xavier kissed her forehead. You are safe, our baby is safe, and we can finally stop looking over our shoulders. Your past is buried, Penelope. This is your life now, here with me on this ranch. Nothing is going to change that. The remaining months of her pregnancy were peaceful and happy. Penelope prepared the house for the baby, sewing clothes and blankets while Xavier built a cradle from beautiful wood he had been saving. They talked endlessly about names and futures, and all the possibilities stretching before them. On a crisp October evening, as the harvest moon rose over the valley, Penelope went into labor. Martha Baker came to help, along with the midwife from town, while Xavier paced downstairs wearing a path in the floor. The labor was long and difficult, but Penelope was strong, and when dawn broke over the mountains, the sound of a baby's cry filled the house. It is a boy, Martha called down the stairs, and Xavier took them 3 at a time to reach his wife and child. Penelope lay exhausted but radiant in the bed, cradling a tiny bundle against her chest. Xavier knelt beside them, his eyes bright with tears as he looked at his son for the first time. He is perfect, he breathed. You are perfect, both of you. Would you like to hold him? Penelope asked softly. Xavier took the baby with surprising confidence, cradling the small body against his broad chest. Hello, little one, he murmured. I am your father. Welcome to Silver Creek Ranch. This is your home and you are so loved already." They named him Thomas, after Xavier's father, and he became the center of their world. Xavier was a devoted father, involved in every aspect of Thomas's care, despite the ranch work that demanded his attention. Penelope watched her strong, stoic husband transform into someone who sang lullabies and made silly faces to earn baby smiles, and she fell even more deeply in love with him. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Xavier hired a few hands to help with the work, allowing him more time with his family. Penelope managed the household and the garden while also learning the business side of ranching, becoming Xavier's true partner in every sense. When Thomas was 2 years old, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. In the spring, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Xavier's mother. If Xavier had been devoted to Thomas, he was absolutely besotted with his daughter, carrying her everywhere and letting her wrap him around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The years flowed by in a rhythm of seasons and work and love. Penelope sometimes thought about her old life in San Francisco, about the woman she had been when she stumbled off that stagecoach, frightened and alone. That woman seemed like a stranger now. She had been reborn here in this valley, shaped by the land and the love of a good man into someone stronger and happier than she had ever imagined possible. When Thomas was 6 and Rose was 4, another son arrived, whom they named Daniel. The house was constantly full of noise and laughter and the chaos of children. Xavier expanded the ranch house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, building something that would last for generations. One evening, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Xavier found Penelope on the porch where they had shared so many important moments. He sat beside her, pulling her against his side. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Regret what?" "Staying here. Marrying me." "This life." Penelope turned to look at him, shocked. "How could you even ask that? This life, this family, you are everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed possible. I just think sometimes about how young you were when you came here, how frightened. I took advantage of your fear and desperation to convince you to marry me." "Xavier Ingram, you did nothing of the sort." Penelope's voice was fierce. "You offered me safety and a future when I had neither. You loved me when I did not think I was worthy of love. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You saved my life in every way that matters." "You saved mine too," Xavier said softly. "I was dying slowly in this house before you came, drowning in grief and loneliness. You brought me back to life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over the mountains. After a while, Xavier spoke again. "I got a letter today, from a lawyer in San Francisco." Penelope stiffened. "What?" "The men who were looking for you all those years ago. It turns out they were eventually arrested for embezzlement and murder. The criminal organization they were part of was dismantled. The lawyer was writing to let me know that if my wife had any information about their activities, she would be welcome to provide testimony, but it was not required. The case against them is solid without it." Penelope let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "So it is truly over." "That part of my life is completely closed." "Completely," Xavier confirmed. "You are free, Penelope. Not just protected, but actually free. Those men can never hurt you or threaten our family. It is done." She turned in his arms, kissing him with all the love and gratitude in her heart. "Thank you for believing in me, for standing by me, for making all of this possible." "Always," Xavier promised. "I will always stand by you. Until the day I die, you and our children are my world." More years passed, each one adding layers of memory and meaning to their lives. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose was bright and spirited, with her mother's green eyes and her father's determination. Daniel was quieter, more thoughtful, but he had a way with animals that was almost magical. When Penelope was 38 and Xavier was 43, they welcomed their fourth and final child, another daughter they named Grace. By then, Thomas was 15 and already working the ranch alongside Xavier. Rose, at 13, was helping her mother manage the household and teaching at the small school that had been built in the valley. Daniel, at 9, spent his days caring for the animals and exploring the mountains. Grace's arrival completed their family in a way that felt perfect. Xavier, now with gray threading through his dark hair, held his youngest daughter with the same wonder he had shown when holding Thomas for the first time. 4 children, he marveled. We built something incredible, Penelope. A legacy. We built a family, Penelope corrected, her own auburn hair now touched with silver. That is worth more than any legacy. As their children grew, the ranch grew with them. Thomas eventually married a kind young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the far side of Silver Creek property. Rose married a teacher from town, a thoughtful man named James who adored her. Daniel, true to his nature, chose to remain on the ranch, content with his animals and his solitude. Grace, the baby of the family, was only 12 when these changes began, and she watched her siblings build their own lives with interest and anticipation. Xavier and Penelope grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat on that porch every evening, watching the sun set over the valley they had called home for so long. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories and dreams. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence, their hands intertwined, content in each other's presence. When Xavier turned 60, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Thomas and Sarah brought their 3 children. Rose and James arrived with their twin daughters. Daniel was there, of course, never having left the ranch. And Grace, now a beautiful young woman of 21, helped Penelope prepare a feast. As Xavier looked around the table at his children, grandchildren, and the woman who had made it all possible, his eyes grew misty. "I want to say something," he announced, standing. 36 years ago, a frightened woman stepped off a stagecoach in Yosemite, running from her past and not knowing where her future lay. I told her that her future started right here on this ranch with me. I could not have known then how completely those words would change both our lives. He looked at Penelope, his gray eyes still as intense as they had been that first day. "You gave me everything. You gave me love, family, purpose, and joy beyond measure. You turned this ranch from a place of work into a home filled with laughter. You made me the luckiest man alive, and I thank God every day that you took a chance on a lonely cowboy who did not know how to express what he was feeling but knew enough to recognize a miracle when he saw one." Penelope stood and crossed to him, tears streaming down her face. "And you gave me a life when I thought mine was over. You gave me safety, love, and a family I treasure beyond words. You kept your promise, Xavier. You gave me a future, and it has been more beautiful than anything I could have imagined." They kissed to applause and cheers from their family, and the celebration continued late into the night. As Penelope watched her grandchildren playing in the yard where their parents had once played, she felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons. Xavier and Penelope eventually handed over most of the daily ranch operations to Thomas and Daniel, though Xavier never stopped working entirely. He loved the land too much to stay away from it. Penelope kept her garden and filled the house with grandchildren who came to visit, teaching them to bake and telling them stories about the old days. When Xavier turned 70, his health began to decline. Penelope nursed him with the same fierce devotion he had shown her all those years ago, never leaving his side, her hand always within reach of his. On a quiet autumn evening, much like the one when Thomas had been born, Xavier called his family to his bedside. "I am not afraid," he told them, his voice weak but steady. "I have lived a full life, a happy life. I have been blessed beyond measure." His eyes found Penelope's. "And I have loved deeply. That is all any man can ask for." Penelope held his hand, her tears falling freely. "I love you. I have always loved you. From that first day to this last moment, you have been my everything." "And you have been mine," Xavier whispered. "Promise me you will keep living, keep the ranch alive, keep our family together, keep being the strong, beautiful woman I fell in love with." "I promise," Penelope said, though her heart was breaking. Xavier smiled, his eyes closing. "Good, that is good." His hand squeezed hers weakly. "Your future started here on this ranch with me, and even when I am gone, I will still be here. In the land, in our children, in every sunset over those mountains. I am not really leaving you, my love. I could never leave you." He took his last breath with his family surrounding him, Penelope's hand in his and peace on his weathered face. The man who had given her everything, who had saved her and loved her and built a life with her, passed from the world quietly, leaving behind a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Penelope kept her promises to Xavier. She remained on the ranch, still vital and active even in her grief. She watched her grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren into the family. She kept the house and the garden and the memories alive. Thomas ran the ranch with wisdom and skill, honoring his father's legacy. Daniel remained her constant companion, his quiet presence a comfort in the lonely years after Xavier's death. Rose and Grace visited often, bringing their families and filling the house with noise and life. The ranch continued to prosper, and the Ingram name became respected throughout the valley. Penelope lived to see Thomas's eldest son take over the ranch operations, ensuring that Silver Creek would remain in family hands for another generation. On a spring morning when she was 82 years old, Penelope walked out to the porch one last time. The valley was beautiful, painted in shades of green and gold, and the mountains stood eternal in the distance. She could almost feel Xavier beside her, his hand warm in hers, his voice soft in her ear. She had lived a long life, a good life. She had gone from a terrified woman on the run to the matriarch of a thriving family. She had known fear and danger, but also love and security. She had built something meaningful, something that would last long after she was gone. As she sat in the rocking chair where she and Xavier had spent countless evenings, Penelope closed her eyes and smiled. She thought about that day so long ago when a desperate woman had knocked on a stranger's door, and how that stranger had become her husband, her partner, her greatest love. She thought about the promise Xavier had made, that her future would start on this ranch with him, and how gloriously he had kept that promise. The sun was warm on her face, and she could hear the sounds of the ranch continuing its daily rhythm around her. Somewhere in the house, her great-grandchildren were playing. In the barn, Thomas was teaching his grandson about horses. In the garden, Grace was showing her daughter how to plant vegetables, just as Penelope had once taught her. The legacy was secure. The love continued. The future she had found on this ranch all those years ago would stretch forward into time, generation after generation, built on the foundation she and Xavier had laid together. Penelope Ingram, once Penelope Jameson, once a woman with no future at all, passed peacefully that afternoon with a smile on her face and Xavier's name on her lips. She was buried beside him on a hillside overlooking the valley, where they could watch over the ranch and the family they had built together for eternity. The Ingram family continued to thrive on Silver Creek Ranch, telling the story of how their family began with a frightened woman seeking refuge and a cowboy who offered her not just safety, but love, purpose, and a future that became more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. It was a love story written across decades and generations, rooted in the Wild West landscape of Yosemite, California. And it endured as all true love stories do, beyond death, beyond time, a testament to what happens when two souls find each other against all odds and choose every day to build something lasting together.